53-man roster is set. And is it unfair to Trey what they are doing to him? We're going to talk about that and more next. All right, welcome back to Last Second Sports, where we are giving you our take down to the last second. Tonight, it's my guy, Suneil, and I. Now, he's in a different setting. You're going to have to cut him some slack. It can get a little loud there. My man's at the airport. This is how dedicated he is. He's getting ready to fly somewhere. I don't know where. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. But he's so dedicated. He showed up to the airport 2 hours early just to make sure he can get the show in because he didn't want to miss another Tuesday episode. Suneil, I love the dedication. How you doing tonight, brother?
Man, doing fantastic. We're going to have the most awkward Last Second Sports Tuesday Jessie and Suneil show, but it's going to be fun nonetheless. Because there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to talk about. Just nothing happened over the last couple of days, right?
No, I mean, we literally are making up a bunch of stuff. Nothing's happened. We're going to do our best to try to limp through this show. I got to say, it's probably going to be awkward for you being at the airport. I'm sure people are looking at you all weird.
But I was looking. You know who I am? You know who I am? I am him. I am him. They always looking. So we'll be all right.
All right. I love it. I appreciate it. All right. Let's before we get into the Jimmy stuff, because I think there's going to be some long discussion there. Let's talk about this roster because it did get finalized today and there's still some changes that are to come, right? And so I think that we have to keep that in mind as we go through this. We're not going to get into the Trey Jimmy stuff, but we're going to go position by position, just quickly give our thoughts. We'll start with quarterback. Quarterback, obviously the Trey Jimmy stuff, like I said, we'll talk about that separate. But for me, the biggest surprise that I had was that Shanahan said that he would have kept Purdy as the second quarterback if Jimmy Garoppolo had not accepted the contract offer they gave him. I really thought that they would go with Sudfeld. I like Purdy a lot, but to have essentially a quarterback room with a starter and a backup that are, 2 years in the league and not even a full season in the league, a rookie, I thought that was a little surprising. I mean, Shanahan likes to have veteran players, especially in important positions. So to hear that Purdy was going to make this team regardless and be the second quarterback, that's what surprised me about the quarterbacks. What surprised you, if anything, about that position?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Sudfeld was ultimately cut after having a guaranteed contract, I think redefines everything moving forward, right? We know that now that guaranteed contract really doesn't mean anything if you get outplayed the way that I believe Sudfeld got outplayed. I mean, Brock Purdy, even though he's a rookie, he definitely looked better in the preseason as far as decision making and just, him overall. I think, we're obviously going to get into the Jimmy and Trey stuff, but, Jimmy being there obviously fills a void because, like you said it, I mean, Sudfeld has the pedigree as far as he's been in the league longer, but I don't know if he necessarily has the game of a veteran quarterback that would make this team a lot better. So I think that's why Purdy, was playing better. So he was going to get the spot, and I believe, that's why. Not to foreshadow too much, Jimmy was kind of a godsend for taking that contract.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, right? Like, if you have to get to a backup quarterback situation, probably better that it's not one of those guys. But I'll say this, too. I'm curious to see what would have happened if Jimmy had not taken that contract. Would they have just kept two quarterbacks? Because I really pegged them to only keep two. There's a lot of really good players that they had to give up because of the way that they structured things, keeping three quarterbacks. We're about to talk about running back, keeping 5 running backs. They gave up some really, really good players, and we'll talk through it here as a whole.
I think they would have kept 3 because the reality is they would have kept 2. Like, there's no need for Purdy right now with Jimmy there. You know what I mean? Like, if they really wanted to keep 2 quarterbacks, who's better than the 2 quarterbacks that they have? They have the most depth at quarterback than any other position. So the fact that they did keep Purdy means 2 things. One, possibly Jimmy could be traded sometime this season, and they like Purdy. They didn't want to give him up, but I think they'd still have that same thought process and keep 3 quarterbacks because of what you said. They want to have at least one veteran in the room.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. This guy says week one predictions. Pain, lots of pain. No, I'll give you my week one prediction. The week of the game, I'll have a Bears guy on. We'll talk a lot about it, but I don't think it's going to go well for the Chicago Bears. That being said, let's talk about running back because I think the biggest surprise is that they kept 5, right? I don't think really anybody saw that coming. But Hasty, the veteran, third down and Hasty, like that was a saying last year. He was the one different back. He didn't make this team. Just overall, what were your thoughts about the running back position and maybe some surprises for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the surprise is what you mentioned, the fact that they kept an extra running back there. We did think that there was going to be some position groups that kept an extra person based off of the roster makeup from the year before. I thought it was going to be the DBs, but it ended up being linebackers and running backs, which was, pretty interesting. But I think the fact that, you look at the running back room, other than Jeff Wilson Jr., everybody is a first or second year running back, which means that they're all young, fairly healthy, you would say. Obviously, Mitchell's nursing some things. So I think this just shows that the running game is going to be number one, right? They're gonna use these running backs. All of them are going to get, I think, a good amount of run. And they don't want to have a situation. I think Kyle Shanahan has PTSD from his running back room last year, and that's why he fortified it with younger guys. Drafted TDP, got another undrafted guy, and Jordan Mason, who I think was excited. So many people were excited that he made the roster, and I think he obviously deserves it. I think he could be another Elijah Mitchell type sneaky back that comes in and makes a big impact on the team just because of his versatility. And he's the most decisive running back out of the newer guys, I would say, which I think bodes well in this type of run scheme.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think we're all excited that Mason made it. I said that if I was being honest, that I didn't think Sermon or TDP deserved to make the roster. Now, obviously, I knew that they weren't going to get rid of TDP. They just drafted him. You got to give him some time to grow. But if they were just taking best players, I don't think either of those guys would have made it. To me, yes, the surprise is 5 running backs, but at the same time, I really thought Sermon wouldn't make this roster. I really thought that this, and one of the questions we asked last week, Suneil, was, is Shanahan ready to cut ties with some of the guys that he took high last year if they aren't good enough to make this team? And I think the answer was clearly no. I mean, you kept an extra running back just to keep Sermon on the roster. We saw that Ambry Thomas made the team. Was it the right decision? I don't know. Time will tell. But it is an interesting move to keep 5 running backs. I mean, I think Green Bay only kept 2 running backs, if I'm not mistaken. So for you to keep 5, that's a lot, So we'll see how it plays out. And again, the roster's it's final for now, but there's still a lot of shaking up that can happen, right?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of maneuvering.
Yeah,
there's going to be a lot of maneuvering.
Absolutely.
Some guys are coming back.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And they've already talked a little bit about that. 49ers Throwback says, at the end of the day, it's a W for both sides. Talking about the quarterback position. We will get into that, my friend. I promise you. But we do appreciate the super chat. And here's how we say thank you around here. All right. I think we can quickly gloss over tight end. To me, there was no surprise. Kittle, Dwelly, Warner. All right. We feel good about that. Okay. Offensive line. I'm going to go through the linemen real quick. We had Trent Williams, Mike McGlinchey, Aaron Banks, Jake Brindell, Spencer Buford. Okay. Right now, so far, I mean, we're talking about guys that are going to start on this team if healthy. Colton McKivitz, Jalen Moore. I think that surprised a lot of people. Nick Sikel and Daniel Brunskill. Any surprises for you along the offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Moore looked rough against Houston. He should not play left tackle ever again in the history of ever, right? Like, he was decent at guard last season. I think we saw some flashes of him at guard, so maybe they relegate him to a guard position. I know Justin Skule wasn't that great, but I was kind of surprised he didn't make the roster just because they don't have that many tackles, right? Sorry.
No, you're good. It's good. Here, I'll take it for a second. So for me, like the biggest thing with the offensive line is Poe. I think he became the darling of this team. A lot of people hoped he would make it. Moore had a horrible outing last week, but again, what's interesting about the 49ers is that with Jalen Moore, they continue to play him at tackle, even though they said they drafted him to be a guard. That's an interesting thing. So sure, he played left tackle and he looked horrible, but how does he look as a guard? That's where it comes up. And then I think Zakel making the roster, a lot of people were surprised that he made it. We didn't see a lot of him. I think they look at him as a future center. And if he's the future center, that makes a lot of sense. So to me, those were the biggest things with the offensive line.
Yeah, I think Poe, they're hoping makes the waivers and they could put him on the practice squad because I don't think they've given up on Poe. I just don't think they had a spot for him based off of everything else, everybody else they needed to keep.
Yeah, absolutely. Davo says, "Who's the young lad on the left named Jesse? Low cut beard. What are you, 20? I wish I was 20.
Hey, but it did grow back pretty quick.
Yeah, it's growing in. You know, we'll see. It'll take some time to get to where it was, but it definitely is growing back pretty quick. All right, let's talk defensive line. Now, one of the things that we have heard is that Willis will be back. So assume that he'll be back on the roster because they supposedly have made this statement that he will be. That was a little bit of a surprise to me. I think cutting Trey and him, I was like, whoa, okay. First of all, we only kept, I think, 9 defensive linemen. This team normally keeps 10, so that was a little surprising, but less surprising once we heard that Willis would be back. So they kept Bosa, Armstead, Kinlaw, Ebukam, probably the starters, Jackson, Hyder, who a lot of us thought would be on the bubble, Givens, Menahu, and Ridgeway. Any surprises for you here?
Nah, just the ones that you mentioned. I mean, I thought Trey was a shoo-in to make it. I think he played well in the preseason, and obviously he has the pedigree there as far as having success from other, with the Colts as well. Obviously, Jordan Willis is my guy. I have him as like one of the breakout players. So the fact that he didn't make the roster definitely hurt my heart, Jesse, because I've been speaking him up big time. But he is coming back, and I still have hope that he's going to go out there and make some moves this year. But overall, yeah, I mean, I think that this is actually a good sign in the sense that maybe the defensive line is healthier than we think, right? Because they would have obviously kept more depth there if they didn't have faith that maybe a guy like Kinlaw can stay healthy longer or Bosa will stay healthy, Armstead, you know what I mean? Because that is obviously the heart and soul of their defense. So the fact that they actually felt confident enough to, I guess, remove a spot there, just tells me that maybe that's a good sign that we're looking at a healthier line than last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that. To me, really, like I said, Trey, that was the biggest surprise. I had him as a lock to make it. I thought it would be between Hyder and Willis. They didn't keep Willis, but they're going to bring him back. So that was a little surprising. I mean, they guaranteed, I think, $1 million to Trey. So you guaranteed $1 million to him. You guaranteed $2 million to Sudfeld, and neither one of them you kept. That was interesting to me. The other thing that I find interesting here, and there's one player at the linebacker position that I really wanted them to keep. So I'll say that in a minute. I'll let you have your thunder. But for the linebacker position, keeping 6 linebackers was a little bit of a surprise. I thought they would keep 5. They kept Warner, Alshire, Greenlaw, Burks, Flanagan Foles, and Curtis Robinson. So any surprises for you there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised Flanagan Fowles is still on the team. I thought he was primed to get traded. I didn't think they would cut him because I think he has value. But, this coupled with, I know we breezed over wide receivers, but, Marcus didn't make the team. I think a lot of people thought he would because of special teams. I think he's getting replaced by some of these linebackers that are going to be playing special teams. So, I think we know that the 49ers have a specialty at developing these undrafted linebackers and making them valuable. And I think they see some things in a couple of these guys. Obviously, we already know Curtis is going to the PUP list or he's going to be put on IR so they could bring back somebody else. But I think they like some of these younger guys. They feel like they're a few years away from being impact players on the team. But the fact that Curtis is going on IR means that they're actually going to only have 5, which is, what is normal. So I guess it's not too crazy. It's just more maneuvering than anything.
Yeah, you're right. I did skip receiver, and Turner. I mean, I thought he was a lock. He was so good on special teams to me.
I said Marcus, but I meant Malik.
Yeah. Turner, exactly. I think we both agree. I mean, I thought he was a lock. It's like special teams. He was so good. He was such a good gunner. He created a fumble, lots of tackles. He was always around the ball. I really wish that he had made this team. Now, you are right about the linebackers. Robinson is going to go on IR, right? And that's how they're going to bring some of these guys back. Man, I really hope that McCrary Ball was going to make this team. I saw a lot of really good in him. Now, the tough part is who am I getting rid of? Obviously, I'm not getting rid of Fred Warner, Aziz, or Greenlaw. Oren Burks was brought in to be a special teams ace. But Flanagan Falls, I either trade if you can. I personally would have been willing to move on from him and take that chance on a guy like McCrary Ball, who's kind of a tweener, but is just so athletic. I thought that he could be an impact player on this team in the future and make it easier to move on from a Greenlaw potentially or an Al-Shaair in the future. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll see if he lands anywhere in the league, but I really loved what I saw from him during the preseason. I liked him a lot.
And I mean, hopefully he'll make it through waivers. The problem with waivers these days is though that the coaching tree is out there, right? The Jets, right. Miami, a lot of these guys are going to swoop up people from the team. So yeah, but hopefully he makes a practice squad because he is a developmental guy that can make some waves in the future.
Yeah, if they can sneak him on the practice squad, that would be fantastic. Now, 5 corners is all that they kept. This one, first of all, Johnson not making this roster. Like, is it true that he may not be bad? They didn't just like put him through waiver. They just flat out cut him. Is he not going to make it back on this team somehow? I mean, this is the guy that's like never, ever going to go away. We thought for sure he'd probably make this roster in some capacity or another, whether it was at safety or corner. They only kept 5 corners. The usual suspects. Now, Verrett's on this team as well. We have to remember that. He was a puck guy. They didn't have to put him on the initial 53 like they did with Ward. But they have Travarius Ward, Emmanuel Mosley, Samuel Womack, all no-brainers. Lenore and Ambry, they kept them both. Any surprises for you there?
Tariq Castro-Fields not making it because, he was somebody who, not because he necessarily is better than these guys, but, there was that one journalist that said that this was the best 6th-round pick the 49ers have ever made, right? And, they don't usually, guys that they draft usually make the team. So to see them not keep a 6th guy, to keep him on, that was a little bit surprising. I think because of the way, and I could be wrong about this, because of the way how many years Dante Johnson has in the league, I don't think he has to go through waivers. I think that he'll end up on the practice squad somehow because I think they're going to utilize him. They just need to maneuver a little bit because he's somebody that can definitely play safety, definitely, that nickel if they need it, or, if they end up needing some depth there. I think he's too good of a backup to not have on the roster. But then again, who knows? Miami's out there, Jets are out there. They can swoop him up too.
Yeah, and to me, I really thought like, okay, maybe he could play safety. Obviously, we know he can play a little bit of corner. He's one of those valuable pieces that if all things go bad, like you can break glass and play him anywhere. You can play him inside, you can play him outside, you can play him at safety. There's a lot of options for Johnson. So we'll see if he makes it back or if somehow it's finally over for him. Now, the safeties they kept, no surprise here. They kept Ward, Odom, Hufanga, Moore. Now, I really did think that they would probably let Moore walk and then try to bring him back potentially with Jimmy Ward having to be on this roster because they would want to keep talent in other places. Maybe Turner is a guy that we talked about. I thought Johnson would make the team as well. Now, safety is interesting. because they are going to need, I would imagine, a fourth safety. And they haven't talked about bringing in a safety, although Tart threw out a lot of cryptic things on Twitter, made it really seem like he's coming back. Somebody asked him if he's coming back. He said, if you only knew, talked about how things come full circle. Very cryptic. It definitely leaned towards Tart is going to be back on this roster, but nothing is imminent. I did put out a poll question on YouTube asking questions, and it was mixed. It was actually a mixed bag. Some people said, yes, I'd love to bring him back. Some people weren't high on bringing Tart back. Just overall thoughts on the safety position. And really, let's talk about Tart. How would you feel about him coming back?
I mean, I was somebody who thought they should have brought him back even earlier, right? I just think that him and Jimmy Ward play very well together. Obviously, now with Jimmy Ward injured, I think that it's even a better place that Tart is there, because Tart is the kind of guy that can move into what Jimmy Ward did and be effective there as well. And that means Hufanga could just stay where he needs to stay, right? I don't know if we trust Odom or Moore to be what Jimmy Ward is, but I think we can trust Tart as long as he's healthy. He's very, very good in those roles. I guess the question would be, when Jimmy Ward comes back, is Tart willing to go to the bench and let Hufanga be Hufanga, right? So that would be, I guess, the question. But until that point, I say bring him back. I think he's better than anybody else that they have. I would want him to start over any of those other guys. So I think him and Hufanga will be the week one starters at safety.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance about that as well. Although, here's something that I found interesting, and this is a move that I would prefer the 49ers make. And I'm all in on Tart coming back to fill in, but at the same time, the Eagles made a trade today for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, which was a steal of a trade for them. To me, he's actually a young Jimmy Ward. He plays very similar to him, can play all over the defense. I would have loved to have gotten him, but he's going to require a lot of money eventually. However, as a part of that deal, they cut Anthony Harris, who just a couple years ago for the Minnesota Vikings was an absolute stud. Kind of a mixed bag since he got to Philly. I would actually take my chances on Harris. I think Harris is better than Tart. And he was slated to probably be their starter, but once they brought in Gardner-Johnson, then they moved on and just cut him to save money. I would take Harris if he's willing to come here over a Jaquiski Tart. I'm fine with either.
Yeah, I think just familiarity with the system, especially since we're gonna need somebody to start week one. I would trust Tart more because he knows the defense at this point, right? He knows the team. It's pretty much like he'd never left, right? All these guys know how he plays. All these guys know him in the locker room, and it'd be the easiest transition. Whereas you bring somebody that hasn't played with the team, they're gonna have to learn some things. Tart could just plug and play and start right where he left off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a good point there. Like I said, I'm fine with either or. If I'm going on the talent play, I think Harris is better. But Tart does know the system. They're, 12, 11 days away from the regular season. Might not be a bad idea to bring in a guy that's familiar. Chris Royal, 100% on board. Appreciate you. He says 100% bring Tart back. No questions about it. I got some love for you, brother. Here you go. Now, we just talked about the 53-man roster, and that's basically going to wrap up the conversation. But I do want to say this. It sounds like they're going to bring back Croft as well. That's the rumor. 4 tight ends and 5 running backs. I don't know about that play. Like, that one's a little iffy for me. Like, to me, that obviously says that you're going to run the ball a ton. I understand that. But 4 tight ends and 5 running backs, you gave up on some really, really good players to make that happen. That's an interesting roster construction, yeah?
I think this just kind of shows that maybe this deep ball that everybody's excited about may not be as prevalent as people might think. And when you look at Tyler Kroft coming back, where he differs from like a Dwelly and a Warner is that he's more of a pass-catching tight end. So for me, I think that, even though Dwelly is, for some reason, Shanahan doesn't believe Dwelly can catch the ball. So they don't use him as a pass-catching tight end. But For me, I think that Tyler Croft coming back might mean that we might see some two tight end sets where they're both actually um, pass catchers and not just in there for blocking. So
Okay.
I think it's actually more opening maybe Kyle Shanahan's playbook. But I do agree with you. This is going to be a predominant run first team. We could see games where Trey's only throwing the ball 20 times. And that could be like the average, to be honest, based off of how, if this running game is what they want it to be, it could be one of those type of offenses that just runs the ball and Trey just manages the game, which I'm cool with at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. 49ers Red Zone, aka Marco, tapping in the chat. I'm going to be live with him at 10:30 Eastern, so in about 35 or so minutes. So tap in over there after this. But Suneil, a little thing might have happened yesterday that I haven't had a chance to talk about other than a quick blurb on the YouTube channel yesterday. And I know that you've had a chance to talk about it, but Jimmy is back on this roster. And it started to look like that was more of a possibility as we got closer to this deadline, but I still didn't believe it would happen. So, first of all, let me say, and I said it in my video, I was wrong. I didn't think that he would come back. I really thought that they would cut him. I didn't think, quite frankly, it. I didn't think it was fair to Jimmy either to make him the backup on this team. I thought that would be a weird situation for him. I thought he had earned a little bit more than that as well. And as much as I'm happy this team is Trey's team, I thought it would be unfair for Jimmy to be the backup in this situation because they did go through a lot last year. He was a beacon of light for some of the players in that locker room over the last couple of years. And I didn't think he would do it, but I was wrong, man. He took a major pay cut, stayed with this team to be the backup. And I got a mixed feeling about this whole thing. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But Suneil, what were your thoughts when they brought Jimmy back? Like initial emotions, and then just like over the last 24 hours, having time to kind of sit back and think about it. Just where are you at with the Jimmy Garoppolo situation?
First off, I have a message from Jack.
Oh, okay.
He wanted me to tell you, Jesse, that he'll accept your apology whenever you're ready to give it to him. So he said that you guys used to go back and forth about him saying that there was a possibility Jimmy to be on the roster. And I remember I said it too, and I was getting killed in the chat for it, that there was a possibility for Jimmy to come back. I just didn't think. So, like, here's the thing, and I think you've mentioned this before. Jimmy at 25, 26, $27 million. Nobody's really excited about that because at that point, you're overpaying for him. But at 6.5 million, if we said that Jimmy Garoppolo was 6.5 million and he was on the free agent market, there's not a fan in the league that wouldn't want him to come in if he's ready to be the backup, right? At 6.5 million. And that's basically what we're doing. Like, you still get to save the money on the contract, and he's better than any of the other backups. Now, the question is, what does this do to the locker room? And that's something that we don't know. Obviously, we hope that, this culture is strong enough. And obviously, Kyle Shanahan is putting all his eggs in that this culture is strong enough and the team is going to, be good. Trey is doing what he needs to do. He went on Instagram and, was in support of Jimmy and Purdy for making the roster and whatnot. But for me, I'm confident with this move in the sense that as far as just a pure football move, sorry. No, by the way, smoking is permitted unless you're in designated areas here at the airport.
Oh, but, okay. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for the announcement. Thanks for the announcement.
Absolutely. I just wanted you guys to know that. But this makes, look, we know that the 49ers Achilles heel is competent quarterback play. And whenever they have a quality starter there, this team is very effective and very dominant and very competitive. And when they don't, they're not, right? Anytime this team has had to go to a backup quarterback, they've fallen off the map. They now have the deepest quarterback room in the league, in the sense that if, God forbid, Trey goes down to injury, I'm more comfortable with Jimmy coming in and this team still being capable versus a guy like Purdy or a guy like Sudfeld. Oh. And I was saying that from the jump. Like, that I was asking them to go get, like, if they were going to trade Jimmy, bring back a Teddy Bridgewater, bring back somebody that you felt like was a competent backup. So in that sense, I think that this is a great move. And, to go back to your point that maybe this isn't fair for Jimmy, I think this kind of shows what exactly Jimmy is worth to the league, right? They gave him every single opportunity to get traded. They gave him every single opportunity to go out there and flirt with free agency or other teams and see if, they cut him, would they get a bigger deal? This is Jimmy Garoppolo basically understanding that even if he was cut, he's not making 10, 15, 20 million. Nobody's out there ready to pay him that. So why not take the big pay cut that he did and have to, accept being a backup to a first-year starter? I think this is a humbling situation for Jimmy. I think this is basically letting everybody know what the market is for Jimmy. And, good thing that Jimmy is the caliber of guy that is willing to do that. So that's what I kind of think about it.
All right. I love this comment by 49 Bloodline. He says, initial emotion, furious. Current emotion, furious. I love that. I love the honesty. Tua says, Jesse, what did you think or feel that Kyle said in the press conference that no matter how bad Trey played, he'll stick with Trey? I think those are things that he needs to say, right? And last year, it didn't start out good with Jimmy. Like, let's be real. This team started out 3-5. It was not looking good. I think a lot of people were worried that playoffs would even be an option. And then, they were able to turn it around. But there was plenty of moments where he could have just thrown in the kid, and sounds like they were close, but it never actually happened. And I think that you have to give the kid even more grace than that, right? 3-5, 3-6, 3-10. It doesn't matter. Like, Trey has to be given these reps. You cannot play this back and forth game. That is one thing you cannot do. And that's one thing that I want to say. So my initial reaction was like, I see the good in this, right? Surprisingly, I think a lot of people label me as a Jimmy hater or whatever, but when you listen to me really talk about Jimmy Garoppolo, I've always said he's a starting level quarterback in this league, anywhere from 17 to 22. I will never take that away from him. I think he's been the consummate pro. That being said, it was time to move on because you're not going to win a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo. History tells us that you're not going to win a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo. And the moment that you do win a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo, he would be a trendsetter as far as NFL history goes. So it's just not going to happen. I'm sorry. However, as a backup, I see the value. I definitely see the value as long as he's willing to take that role. And it's interesting that they worked that contract to make it less guaranteed money than what Trey Lance is getting. And they did that because they wanted to make it clear to Jimmy and to Trey that this is Trey's team, right? So I love that they did that first. I love that they talked to both Jimmy and Trey to make sure Trey was good with it. He was good with it, which says he's confident in the situation. And then he was clear as day again today in the press conference. This is Trey's team. There is no controversy. Same thing he said last year. Didn't want to believe it. I know I didn't want to believe it, but that's the way that it played out. And he's saying that again this year. So anybody who's like, "Oh, Jimmy's back," and it's because he doesn't believe in Trey. None of that's true. Listen to what he said. Like, at some point, we have to trust what he's telling us. And he's been telling us a lot of things that we don't necessarily want to listen to. And every single time for the last 2 years, he's basically meant exactly what he said. So one thing that I did as time went on that I started to think through, and I got into it a little bit with Croc. Shout out to Croc, my guy. But we got into it a little bit today on Twitter Spaces because a lot of people were spinning this as if there is no negative. And I can't say that. One thing that he said on his show is, well, somebody had asked him about Trey or Jimmy coming in for Trey if Trey's not playing good. And he goes, well, that's up to Trey. As long as Trey does what he has to do, he doesn't have to worry about Jimmy. And so my rebuttal to that is, you wouldn't say that with Nate Sudfeld. You wouldn't say that with Brock Purdy. He would have as long of a leash as he needs to figure it out. Now, all of a sudden that Jimmy's on the team, you're willing to say, well, he's got to make sure that he earns it to stay in that spot. I think that's where we go wrong. And that's where I have the issue, because I think members of this team who are human can have those same thoughts, and it can cause an issue in the locker room. It absolutely can. You're talking about a bunch of human beings who have opinions on everything. They went to coach last year and told him, we don't want the Trey package. We just want to roll with one quarterback. It's throwing us off. And he listened. What if they have a couple bad losses, or Trey has a couple bad games, and they go to coach and say they want Jimmy? Is he going to listen then? You're leaving the door open for potential problems. I'm not saying it's going to be a problem. I think Trey will be fine. I don't think it'll ever get to that. But that door is not even cracked open with Sudfeld or Purdy as the backup. And that's just my thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on how you look at it. I think that Trey's under extreme pressure regardless, because of the roster and the expectations of what this team is. I think all of us want to sit here and be like, okay, well, he's just a, first year starter, and everything, he's going to obviously have these ups and downs, and we should be patient and all this kind of stuff. But the reality is, this is the NFL, and nothing's guaranteed. And a roster like this isn't guaranteed to be the same roster next year. You don't know who's going to be healthy, who's not going to be healthy, who can they keep and who they can't. So the reality is, if we ever get to a point where we're discussing should Jimmy be playing and should Trey be playing, that is on Trey. And that's just the reality. It would be if he was on the Jaguars, if he was on the Jets, if he was on the Bears, he wouldn't have this type of pressure, because none of those rosters are Super Bowl capable rosters, right? Even Mac in New England doesn't have the type of pressure that Trey's going to have, because I don't think anybody's looking at New England's weapons and thinking that they're Super Bowl caliber offense. So the reality is Trey has to be good, because otherwise it's a waste of a year. And maybe it's not in the grander scheme of things, because you're trying to develop a quarterback. But as far as the maximizing this year to win a Super Bowl, Trey has to be serviceable. Now, the great thing is he doesn't have to be great. He doesn't have to be top 10. He doesn't even have to necessarily be top 15. We've seen what caliber of Jimmy's play, and that this team can make it to an NFC championship game. This team can make it to a Super Bowl. He just has to be at that level. And if he's playing at that level and this team is winning, Jesse, we don't have these conversations. If this team is losing and Trey is being inconsistent, being inaccurate with his throws, making bad decisions and all this kind of stuff, yeah, well, if he was in a different team, yeah, they would probably give him the opportunity to take those reps and grow, have those growing pains without any kind of scrutiny. But I think this could be a situation where he develops quicker, because he needs to stay focused. He can't have an off game without having those questions asked. I do believe that Shanahan is going to be pretty stubborn, that he'll give Trey all the leash in the world. But let's just hope it never gets to a point where he has to make that move, because if Shanahan's willing to make that move, that's because Trey's playing really bad. He's going to make the best decision for his team. So I don't think it'll ever get to that point, because I can't see Trey ever being that bad. I only think Jimmy will play if Trey is injured. But if we're getting to a point where we're questioning who should be the starter, that is on Trey, because at that point he's playing bad enough to where it's a question.
I disagree. Here's where I disagree. I think, first of all, those conversations are going to happen. Like, there's just a segment of this fan base that is not in on Trey Lance.
But Jesse, I'm not talking about the fan base. I'm talking about within the organization. Forget the fan base.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
I'm talking about if Shanahan is thinking that, that's on Trey.
And I don't think Shanahan, let me be clear about this. I don't think Shanahan's ever once going to have that thought. I really don't. I believe that Shanahan has dug his foot in. This is who he wants. He's going to play Trey all season, barring injury. 1,000%. I don't think Shanahan's going to budge. But I do think players in that locker room at some point or another are going to start to have those thoughts. Things happen in the NFL. You lose games that you didn't think you should lose. You have a guy that you think brought you to a Super Bowl, right? Armstead said it himself. Well, Jimmy's the most important thing that's ever happened to us, because without him, we weren't winning. None of that, like, what I think doesn't matter. What they think does, whether it's true or not. Like, that's the thought process some of these players have. So to think that those conversations aren't going to happen, I think is naive. Now, doesn't mean that it has to turn everything upside down and turn it into an issue. That being said, I just think it's a weird situation to be in. And NFL history shows us every single time that the new QB comes in, they get rid of the old QB. There's only 3 situations that I can think of that didn't happen, and none of those were even close to the same as this scenario. Not even close. It was like Palmer came in and they kept Kitna. Like, okay. Ben Roethlisberger came in and they kept Tommy Maddox. Like guys that weren't winning a lot of games in this league or going to Super Bowls or NFC championships. And to me, the fact that we even have to consider it, that's where there's an issue, and we're already seeing it. The media is already running with this narrative that he doesn't trust him. Mayoko saying it could be week 1 that we see Jimmy. Like these things, I don't care. Players are on social media, not all players, but a lot of players are on social media. And they see these things. If you think that they're not penetrating the locker room at all and it's just bulletproof and we're good here, like, no, these things do add up. And if you take a bad loss, whether it's Trey or not, those conversations will happen amongst teammates. Now, again, doesn't have to upheave everything, but those conversations will happen. And it could have been completely avoided. I see the positive in this. If Trey goes down, Jimmy is a hell of a lot better than any other option they had. I agree with that completely. But man, there are some things here that we have to keep an eye on. And I think it's completely doing the situation unfair if we don't look at both sides of this and realize that there potentially could be an issue that comes from this. There just is.
Yeah, I mean, it's naive to think that, everything you're saying is like, I think the first thing that people think about, because we've seen it so many times. But I remember, I don't know if you've ever seen that doc that first episode of that Brady series that ESPN had, where he was talking about his situation with Drew Bledsoe. Right, he obviously went in because Drew Bledsoe was injured, but then when Drew Bledsoe was healthy again, Belichick kept going with him because of continuity and whatnot. And he had to earn it. He wasn't playing well, but he had a coach that was behind him, and he played just well enough to keep these guys believing in him, right? And I think that's a sixth round draft pick that was doing that. I mean, Trey is the number 3 pick in the draft, right? First round draft pick. At a certain point, we also need to take the training wheels off of Trey and realize that he needs to put his big boy pants on. This isn't NDSU. This isn't you're the starter and there's nobody behind you. This is the NFL. And not only is this the NFL, this is the NFL on a team that expects to win a Super Bowl. So whatever that he's looking over his shoulder, if this is breaking Trey, he's not going to be that guy anyways, right? So I just think this gives us the greatest opportunity to see what Trey's capable of. I think he has the maturity, he has the work ethic, and he has the mindset to not have his confidence wavered. And I think this is actually going to be, it reminds me of what's that movie with Denzel where he's the coach of the football? I remember the Titans.
Remember the Titans?
Yeah. Where they were like, this could be the biggest blunder or something. I'm paraphrasing it. He's like, I think this is going to be our, biggest, like, whatever he's trying to say. This is going to be our biggest victory or whatever the case may be, because of all of this turmoil, when he shines, it's going to be even more, of the guy that we're going to be like, oh, we love this guy. This is our quarterback. So I think Trey's taking it in stride. I think this is going to be a very exciting year for the 49ers. Yeah, the fan base is going to be the fan base. But at the end of the day, I trust in Coach Shanahan. I trust in this leadership. And I trust in Trey, man. I think he's going to play well enough to where we don't have these questions.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Also, I don't worry about Trey's psyche at all. I really don't. Like early on in the offseason when I would talk about it, I would talk about his psyche. I really don't worry about his psyche because, again, he was asked. But I do worry about the rest of the team and what their thoughts are. And I just think minds can roll. It's not though. And this is where it's frustrating. You can't as an organization sit this kid his whole first year or have that be the plan. He plays a couple games. He literally comes out in the offseason and says, the games that I grew the most, or the weeks that I grew the most, were the weeks that I played. So he's telling you, I grew the most when I played, yet you chose to sit me. So now all of a sudden, we're going to throw you out there with potentially 4 offensive linemen who are brand new on this team with 7 combined starts. The old quarterback who's been with this team when they've won some games sitting behind you and say, oh, by the way, you better come in on fire. Otherwise, it's on you and we're going to pull you, or there's a chance we can pull you. Like, that's bullshit to me.
But who's
You
saying
can't
that,
put
Jesse?
everything on him. I'm just saying in general, that is the attitude of this fan base. I'm hearing that all over the place. It's all on Trey. It's on Trey.
But that,
it's on Trey.
once again, we got to separate the fan base from the organization, right? And what I mean by that is, if you had the opportunity, if you're Shanahan and Lynch, and you have the opportunity to have Jimmy Garoppolo as your backup quarterback for $6.5 million, are you taking that, or are you not taking that? Does that make your team better, or does it make your team worse?
Well, not only does it make it better, and I understand that, but it also makes him more tradable. Like, it just makes him more tradable. Like, there's still an option he can be traded, and it's easier to trade him
for much higher, right? For much more valuable, right? You're not going to take anything less than a 3rd-round draft pick at this point. So you're getting a 3rd, 2nd, or a 1st out of it, right? Depending on the desperation of the team that they're trading with. But for me, I think that us as a fan base, we worry about what the players are going to think, what this is going to think, what that is going to think. At the end of the day, Trey is going to be this leader that he needs these guys to buy into him regardless. And I would much rather them buy into him because of his level of play and what he's showing out there on the field and in the locker room and all that kind of stuff, rather than it just be because he's the only option. You know what I mean? And I think that that's where it's obviously a more pressurized situation, because there is another option in Jimmy Garoppolo, but this just gives him the opportunity to rise to the occasion. And I think he will. And if he is a 3rd-round draft pick, he has to, right? At any point, we're seeing Trevor Lawrence has nobody behind him. That doesn't necessarily mean he's balling out. Zach Wilson has nobody behind him. That doesn't mean he's balling out. Justin Fields has nobody behind him. That doesn't mean he's balling out. At the end of the day, we need Trey's play and what he's able to inspire these guys to do to be the reason why these guys buy into him, not just because his competition is Nate Sudfeld or Brock Purdy. You know what I mean? So that's where I just look at it as an opportunity for Trey to show what he is and what he's about. Because I think he's going to get every opportunity. Shanahan, the good thing about him, some people hate him for it, some people love him for it. He's stubborn. He made the choice. Every single press conference, he's saying, Trey's a starter, Trey's a starter. And he said that last year with Jimmy, and Trey never became the starter over Jimmy. I don't think Trey will ever become the starter over Jimmy unless Trey is injured. So I think he'll have every opportunity. But you're right, the fan base is going to be the fan base. I don't really pay attention to that, though.
Flav says, Jess, Shan just got done saying that Jimmy's the best quarterback since Young. If you trust him, trust him. Trey will be on a very short leash. He has to win. I disagree with that. And you got to remember, he was trying to trade Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, Jimmy Garoppolo is not better than Jeff Garcia. Let's just clean that up right now. Jeff Garcia actually won his team a playoff game and actually made a Pro Bowl. Like, he's not better than Jeff Garcia at their best. And then he also says that I'm a big Trey skeptic. If he wins, I'm all for him. He also wasn't better than Kaepernick. Let's clear that up as well. If he wins, I'm all for him. But I think Jimmy Garoppolo and team both think Jimmy will be the guy when it matters. His contract is set up that way, and Jimmy G probably feels that he's better than Trey with one good shoulder. Yeah, he may feel that way. He's not. That's just the reality of the situation. Like, here's the deal, is we just got done talking about it, and both of us agree that it's Trey's team. Like, it's just the way that it is. It's time to move on. And we can talk about, okay, so let's say Trey struggles and you put in Jimmy Garoppolo. What's the results? You're not winning a Super Bowl. And the ultimate result that you want is to win a Super Bowl. So let's assume that you're not winning a Super Bowl with Trey because he's quote unquote not ready. Well, you're also not winning one with Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, that is clear. So to do this back and forth game, like, oh man, if Trey's not the answer, we have the answer backing him up. No, we have the answer to make the playoffs right? Like if all things go wrong, they can make the playoffs with Jimmy. They've proven that. They're not winning a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo. So it's not like you have the Super Bowl answer on the bench. If you did, he would just be the starter flat out and they would have never shopped him. Like it's a wild take. I'll just say that, Flav. It's a wild take, but I appreciate it. He says, Jess, you just got done telling us that Shan was honest about all this and we need to trust him what he says, but now you're cherry picking. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying he's honest about the situation in front of him as far as decision making. He's been very clear about that. But when you're trying to sell something, you're gonna talk them up and make them sound better than what they are. And to be real, maybe Shanahan does believe that. That doesn't mean that he thinks he should start him. I have a feeling that if you really had him in a room and you could ask him, hey, choose between Kaepernick at his best, choose between Garcia, choose between Jimmy G, I don't think that the answer would be Jimmy Garoppolo. That's just me.
And I don't think this contract is set up for anything that that they have all this confidence in Jimmy. They told him the only way you could be on this team is if you take a $20 million pay cut. Like, that's not, hey, we have the confidence that you're the better quarterback. If they thought he was the better quarterback, they would have just kept him at the money that they could keep him at. They made him take less money. They made him accept that he's a backup. To me, you don't do that to a guy you think is better than your starter. That's a humiliating thing for a guy that was a quarterback when you went to a Super Bowl. Just last year was in the NFC Championship game as a quarterback. So to me, I don't understand where Flav is saying that the team thinks he's better and all this kind of stuff. Nah, he hasn't even taken one practice with this team. He's been on the sideline the whole time. They've allowed Rita to draw a picture of him every single day until he gets traded. Like, this guy has been, the only reason why he's not traded is because the rest of the league didn't think he's valuable enough to trade for. Otherwise, he would be traded at this point, right? So yeah, I disagree with Flav talking about this is all a sign that the team is behind Jimmy. No, he's great as a backup quarterback, but that's what they see him as a backup in case Trey gets injured. That's the only thing I think this says.
Shay came in with the this is organizational malpractice. This is a Twitter inside joke. I love that. Thanks, Shay. I appreciate it. And chill out on 9 Drinks. First of all, this is a Lion and a 49er channel. He's showing love here in the 49er chat. I appreciate it. Bottom line is this, Flav, you can say what you want, but if Jimmy didn't agree to that pay cut, he wouldn't be on this roster today. Like, if he said, no, I'm not taking the pay cut, or I want more than what Trey's making, he wouldn't be on this roster. If he wanted 10 million guaranteed, he wouldn't be here. He'd be on the street looking for a job. That's the bottom line. And if he is the best quarterback since Steve Young, Shanahan wouldn't put him on the streets, and he would have if he wouldn't have taken that pay cut. So that's just the reality of the situation. And he said that he would have done that. So if we're going to listen to everything he says, we got to believe that as well. Matthew Sanders says, remember another high draft quarterback who struggled and how long it took them to develop due to the front office antics. One Alex Smith. Yeah, Pepperidge Farms does remember. You're absolutely right about that. If things are mishandled, then quarterbacks can certainly fall out of this league. This can be all players, though, right? If you mishandle all players, they can fall out of this league, and it's unfortunate. It's the reality. I'll land the plane with this. Do I think it's unfair to Trey? I'm not going to go that far. I think it's a weird situation. I think all of this that we're talking about is a big smokescreen of what the real problem is. I worry about Trey, Jimmy, hell, Patrick Mahomes behind this offensive line. I think that's the real issue of this team right now. That's really where our attention should be. That's the concern to me. Jimmy being the backup to Trey Lance, I mean, that is what it is. That's going to play out however it plays out. Ultimately, I think Trey's going to be fine there. But the offensive line, man, I think that is ultimately not the quarterback position, not any other position. I think ultimately the offensive line is what can keep this team from making a deep run in the playoffs. That's where my worry is. Suneil, I know you're not as worried. Why don't you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the offensive line has struggled this offseason, but it also has been full of backups. And the backups, I think, are what's causing the offensive line to struggle so much, because the reality is when the game is in play, they Kyle Shanahan runs his schemes towards the strength of his offensive line. So that's going to be Trent, that's going to be McGlinchey, whatever the case may be. He couldn't do that when Jalen Moore is the left tackle and Colton McKivitz is the right tackle. There is no strength in that case. So I think having the tackle positions with starters, especially a starter like Trent, changes the whole dynamic of the offensive line. I don't think Banks, Brendel, and Burford have been that bad. I think that people just overall look at the offensive line and say it's been terrible without identifying those three players. Those three players have been pretty consistent. They haven't been like superstars. None of them are going to be all pros, but they've been good enough to be part of a capable offensive line. I think once we get the tackles in place, this offensive line is going to be much different. So, and also all of these guys are better in the run than they are in pass protection, and we already know they're going to run the ball way more than they throw the ball. So
I think some of the things that they can do, and I expect them to do, I think that this offense is going to look a lot more like a Denver Bronco offense with Jake Plummer, and a mix between that, what they've been doing, and what they did with RG3. I think there's going to be a lot of quarterback movement. I think that's how they're going to elect to protect Trey Lance. And with his mobility, they're going to move the launch point for him quite a bit. And I think that that's something that we haven't seen. I don't think we've seen a lot of the pistol and some of these other things that are going to come out. I think this offense is going to look maybe a little bit more different than what people are expecting. And I think part of it is Trey's skill set. I think part of it is who they're deciding to keep on the roster. But I think a big part of it is they're going to try to mask the O line. And that's how you do it. With a receiver like Danny Gray, for example, the way that you mask somebody not being able to beat press, which he struggles with, is you get him in motion so he doesn't have to worry about beating press. You put him in the slot so he doesn't have to worry about beating press. There are ways around everything. And even if this offensive line is not that great, which I'm afraid that it's not going to be that great, there are ways to hide that weakness to a certain extent. To your point, they have to figure out how to run the ball. They better be good in run blocking, because if they're not, then none of this works. Play action doesn't work. Moving the launch point doesn't work. None of that is going to work. So they have to be able to run the ball and establish the run. I think they'll be able to do that with guys like Kittle there to help and use check. I think they'll be okay there. And as long as they are, all the other stuff can flow. But I do expect that this offense is going to look probably a lot more different than what people may be expecting going into this thing.
I think it doesn't look that much different than when Jimmy Garoppolo was quarterback. Like I said, I think the deep ball isn't going to be as prevalent as we might like. We will see it because obviously Trey likes throwing it. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a lot of managing and utilizing the run as a power play or the explosive plays. And then every now and then you'll see a deep ball, but it's not going to be like 5 deep balls a game, I don't think.
Oh no. I don't think that it's going to be different from that point. I think where what you can do with Trey's arm on a regular basis is you can stretch the field horizontally, though. And that's where I think it'll be very different. I think there's going to be a lot of rolling out to one side, high-low reads, moving the launch point, getting Trey to run out of pistol, just a lot of movement out of different formations than what we're used to seeing. And then when throws do come, I think that they'll elect to stretch the field horizontally, which is something that they did, quite frankly, with RG3. Yeah, they took shots here and there, but they really stretched the field horizontally. You watch the way that team played. I mean, it was constant trying to get one-on-one matchups on the edge and just see if you can get broken tackles. Guys like Debo and Juszczyk and Kittle, you get them those one-on-one matchups out there, they're going to make something happen. Ayuk as well. And so I think that's where you're going to see some of the difference. I really do think you're going to see a lot of moving of the pocket, a lot of changing the launch point, and that's where it's going to change up a lot. I don't think there's going to be a lot of all of a sudden they're going to be throwing it deep a ton. Obviously, they will a hell of a lot more. I mean, Trey Lance just naturally takes more chances, but I do think horizontally and moving the launch point is something that you're certainly going to see in this offense that we did not see really at all in the preseason.
I agree, my man. We're right at the hour.
Yes, sir. All right, real quick. Flav says, I have a feeling that He has to start Trey because if he doesn't, he concedes that he made the wrong blah, blah, blah. No, listen, it's a conspiracy theory, man. I appreciate you, Flav. I really do. But I can't, I mean, listen, I can't entertain it. I'm sorry. I don't have the energy right now. I got to get to another show. I will say this. I appreciate all of you. Love each and every one of you. Even Flav. Flav, you're frustrating me a little bit, but I still love you. I appreciate that you're a part of the community, man. And I respect your opinion. I just know, and I will say this, you promised you would buy a Trey jersey if they are winning. They have a winning record after 8 weeks. I'm holding you to that. I remember that comment, and you will come on the show, make an appearance with that Trey jersey on. That will be the expectation. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Suneil's channel as well, which the link is in the description. Please go give him some love. He just did an hour show with us from the frickin' airport, going through all the BS, all the announcements, all the annoyance, arrived at the airport early just to make sure that he could get on the show here. Appreciate you, my man. I will see you next week. And to the rest of you, I will be back tomorrow with Grant on 49ers After Dark. Peace.